Mira didn't know that the man who would soon command silence from an entire kingdom was watching her every move from across the great hall. She didn't know that her carefully planned escape would be the very thing that revealed her to him, and she certainly didn't know that the moment she tried to disappear into the crowd, she would become the most important person in the realm. The kitchen buzzed with frantic energy as servants prepared for the Alpha King's coronation ceremony. Steam rose from massive pots, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and honeyed wine. Mira kept her head down, her dark hair tucked beneath a simple cap, hands steady as she arranged platters of delicate pastries. Just another servant, nobody important, nobody worth remembering. That was exactly how she needed it to stay. 3 years she had hidden in plain sight, scrubbing floors and serving meals, while the truth of who she really was burned like a brand against her ribs. Lady Mira Ashworth, daughter of the late Lord Ashworth, was supposed to be dead. Her family's estate had been burned, her parents murdered in their beds, and she had vanished without a trace. Let them think her dead. It was safer that way. "The ceremony begins in an hour," called the head cook, wiping sweat from her brow. "Everything must be perfect for His Majesty." Mira's stomach twisted. She had been planning this escape for months, waiting for the one day when every soul in the kingdom would be focused on the coronation. When the great hall filled with hundreds of nobles, when guards would be positioned for ceremony rather than surveillance, when she could finally slip away and disappear forever. The sound of trumpets echoed through the castle, and Mira's pulse quickened. Soon, very soon. She finished arranging the last tray and stepped back, glancing toward the servants' entrance to the great hall. Through the partially open door she could see the beginning of the procession. Lords and ladies in their finest silks and jewels, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. And then she saw him. The Alpha King stood at the far end of the hall, tall and commanding in black and gold, his presence so powerful that the very air seemed to bend around him. Even from this distance, Mira could feel the weight of his authority, the supernatural energy that marked him as something beyond human. His dark hair caught the light from 1,000 candles, and when he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of sharp features and eyes like molten amber. Something strange twisted in her chest, a pulling sensation, warm and insistent, that made her breath catch. She pressed her hand to her sternum, confused. What was that? "Stop gawking and help me with these goblets," snapped another servant, and Mira jerked back to attention. The ceremony was beginning. Nobles filed into the great hall in waves, their conversations growing louder as excitement built. Mira watched them through the doorway, her heart hammering as she waited for the perfect moment. The Alpha King took his place at the altar, and the crowd pressed forward to witness his official claiming of the throne. Music swelled, voices rose in ancient chants, and every eye in the kingdom was fixed on their new ruler. Now. Mira slipped off her apron and smoothed her simple grey dress. She had saved every copper for 3 years to buy a cloak of decent quality, something that wouldn't immediately mark her as a servant. From a hidden pocket she withdrew a small velvet hood and settled it over her hair. With careful steps she made her way to the servants' entrance. The guard stationed there was watching the ceremony, his attention completely absorbed by the spectacle. Mira held her breath and stepped into the great hall. The space was magnificent, all soaring arches and golden light. Hundreds of people filled the room, their fine clothes creating a sea of colour and movement. Perfect cover. Mira pulled her hood lower and began to move along the edge of the crowd, keeping to the shadows between the massive stone pillars. She was just another face in the multitude, anonymous, invisible. The Alpha King's voice carried across the hall as he spoke the ancient words of his oath, his tone deep and commanding. Mira didn't dare look in his direction. She focused on the far doors, on freedom, on the life she would build once she was finally, truly free, almost there, Just a few more steps and she would reach the main entrance. From there she could slip outside and disappear into the city beyond the castle walls. Her heart soared as she pressed against the wall near the great doors. She had done it. 3 years of careful planning, of living as someone else, and she was finally going to escape. The ceremony continued behind her, the Alpha King's voice weaving through promises of protection and justice. Mira allowed herself one moment to breathe, one instant of pure relief. She was free. And then, impossibly, the music stopped. The Alpha King's voice cut off mid-sentence, leaving only silence so profound that Mira could hear her own heartbeat. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd, but beneath that was something else. Something that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Tension, predatory focus, the feeling of being hunted. Mira's blood turned to ice as that strange pulling sensation in her chest intensified, tugging her back toward the altar, back toward him. No, it wasn't possible. There was no way he could know who she was, no way he could have noticed one servant among hundreds of guests. But when the Alpha King's voice rose again, cutting through the confused whispers of the crowd, Mira knew with bone-deep certainty that her carefully constructed world was about to shatter. "Everyone stop!" The words were spoken quietly, but they carried to every corner of the great hall with supernatural force. "No one moves until I find what belongs to me." Darian had felt her the moment she entered the great hall. The coronation oath sat on his tongue, ancient words of power and protection that should have commanded his complete focus, but every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to turn around, to find her, to claim what was his mate. After 28 years of waiting, of believing he might be the first Alpha King in history, destined to rule alone, she was here. The bond hummed between them like a golden thread pulled taut, singing in his blood with a frequency that made his teeth ache. He forced himself to continue the ceremony, speaking the ritual words while his supernatural senses tracked her movement through the crowd. Her scent reached him even over the heavy perfumes of the nobles and the smoke from countless candles. Wild jasmine and something uniquely her, something that made his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. She was afraid. He could taste her fear in the air, sharp and acidic, and it took every ounce of his control not to abandon the ceremony immediately and go to her. "Do you, Darian Blackthorn, swear to protect this realm and all who dwell within it?" The high priest's voice echoed through the great hall, but Darian barely heard him. She was moving toward the doors, moving away from him. "I do so swear," he managed, his voice rougher than it should have been. Several nobles in the front row exchanged glances, noting the strain in their new king's voice. The bond stretched as she put more distance between them, and Darian's hands clenched at his sides. Everything in him rebelled against letting her leave. The wolf inside him snarled, demanding he chase, claim, protect. She belonged to him as surely as he belonged to her, and she was trying to escape. His enhanced hearing caught the whisper of fabric against stone as she pressed herself against the wall near the main entrance. So close to freedom, so close to slipping away from him before he could even properly see her face. "Do you swear to rule with wisdom and justice, placing the needs of your people above your own?" the high priest continued, apparently oblivious to the Alpha King's growing agitation. Darian's jaw tightened. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he stood, swearing to put his people first, while every fibre of his being demanded he abandon them all for the woman trying to disappear into the shadows. "I do so swear," he repeated, but his voice carried an edge that made several of the gathered nobles shift uncomfortably. She was almost at the doors now. In moments she would be gone, lost to him perhaps forever. The thought sent a spike of primal panic through his chest. He had searched for her for 3 years. 3 years of knowing she existed somewhere in his kingdom while he was powerless to find her. But she had come to him. Fate had brought his mate directly into his reach, and he would be damned if he let her slip away again. The high priest lifted the ancient crown, heavy with gold and precious stones, and Darian felt the weight of it before it even touched his head. But the true weight settling on his shoulders wasn't the responsibility of kingship. It was the knowledge that in the next few moments he would have to choose between duty and desire, between the ceremony his people expected and the woman his soul demanded. And do you swear to honour the ancient bonds that tie our people together, to protect the sacred connections that strengthen our realm? The question hung in the air, and Darian's lips curved in a smile that several courtiers would later describe as predatory. "I do so swear," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the great hall, "and I claim that right now." The high priest blinked in confusion, the crown still poised above Darian's head. "Your Majesty?" But Darian had already turned away from the altar, his amber eyes scanning the crowd with supernatural precision. The bond pulled him forward, and he followed its guidance without hesitation. "Your Majesty, the ceremony," someone called out, but Darian raised one hand, and silence fell like a physical thing. The power in that gesture rippled outward, touching every person in the great hall with the undeniable force of his authority. Nobles who had been whispering fell silent. Guards straightened to attention. Even the musicians in the gallery froze with their instruments half raised. "Everyone stop," Darian said, his voice carrying the supernatural resonance that marked him as alpha. It wasn't a request. It was a command that sank into the bones of every person present, compelling obedience on the most fundamental level. The great hall became a tableau, hundreds of people frozen in place as their new king's will pressed down on them like a weight. "No one moves until I find what belongs to me." Murmurs tried to start and died in throats. Fear and confusion rippled through the crowd, but no one dared to disobey. The Alpha King's power was absolute in this moment, and everyone present could feel it. Darian stepped down from the altar, his movements fluid and predatory. The bond guided him forward, growing stronger with each step, past the confused nobles in their finest silks, past the frozen guards, past the trembling servants who had never seen their king's supernatural nature displayed so openly. She was near the doors. He could feel her terror spiking, could almost hear her heart hammering in her chest. The scent of jasmine and fear grew stronger as he moved through the crowd, following the golden thread that connected them across space and souls. "Your Majesty," the high priest called out weakly, "the crown." "Can wait," Darian said without turning around. His attention was fixed entirely on the figure pressed against the wall near the great doors, small and slight in a grey dress and dark hood, trying desperately to make herself invisible. But she blazed like a beacon to his enhanced senses. She called to every instinct he possessed, every need he had never been able to name. The crowd parted before him without being asked, nobles stumbling over each other in their haste to get out of their Alpha King's path. Whatever was happening, whoever he was seeking, they wanted no part of standing between a supernatural predator and his prey. Darian's steps slowed as he drew closer, savouring the moment. 3 years of searching. 3 years of knowing she existed, but being unable to find her. And now she was here, within reach, trying to hide from the very bond that would make her his queen. The irony of it made his chest tighten with something between amusement and fierce possession. She had come to witness his coronation, never knowing that she was about to become the most important part of it. He was close enough now to see the tremor in her shoulders, to watch the rapid rise and fall of her breathing beneath the simple grey fabric, close enough to catch the full force of her scent and let it sink into his lungs like an addiction he would never want to cure. "Found you," he murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. And then he reached out and gently moved aside the hood that shadowed her face, revealing features that were even more beautiful than he had dreamed during 3 years of searching. Dark hair that caught the candlelight like silk, skin like porcelain, and eyes the colour of storm clouds, wide with terror and recognition as they met his mate, his queen, his everything. "There you are," he said softly, and his voice carried the weight of destiny fulfilled. The moment the Alpha King's fingers brushed her hood away, Mira felt her world tilt on its axis. Those amber eyes. She had seen them from across the great hall, but nothing had prepared her for their intensity up close. They burned into hers with a recognition so complete, so absolute that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. He knew her. Somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly who she was. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the preternatural silence that had fallen over the great hall. "I think there's been some mistake." The corner of his mouth lifted in a smile that was both gentle and predatory. "No mistake, little one." Around them, the frozen crowd watched in stunned silence. Hundreds of the kingdom's most powerful nobles stood motionless, bearing witness to something they clearly didn't understand. The high priest still held the crown aloft, his arms beginning to shake with the effort of maintaining the position. Guards remained at attention, their confusion evident but their obedience absolute. The Alpha King had commanded silence, and silence he would have until he chose otherwise. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to step backward, only to find herself pressed against the cold stone wall, trapped. The pulling sensation in her chest had intensified the moment he touched her, and now it felt like a living thing, reaching across the space between them with invisible hands. "I don't understand," she managed, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I'm nobody, just a servant. You must be looking for someone else." "A servant," he repeated softly, and something dangerous flickered in those amber depths. "Is that what you've been telling yourself for 3 years?" The blood drained from Mira's face. 3 years. He knew about the 3 years she had been hiding, which meant he knew about everything else. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but her voice shook with the words. Darian stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could catch the scent of cedar and something wild that made her head spin. When he spoke, his voice was pitched for her ears alone, though the supernatural silence meant every word carried to the farthest corners of the hall. "Lady Mira Ashworth," he said, and her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. "Daughter of Lord Edmund Ashworth and Lady Catherine, born in the spring of 1847, lost to us when her family's estate burned and her parents were murdered in their beds." Each word hit her like a physical blow. Her secret, the identity she had buried so carefully, laid bare before hundreds of witnesses. Gasps echoed through the crowd as the implications sank in. A noble daughter, presumed dead, discovered alive and hiding among the servants. "The servants' quarters have been searched 3 times in the past year," Darian continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But you weren't hiding there, were you? You were hiding in plain sight, working in the kitchens, keeping your head down, making yourself invisible." Tears burned behind Mira's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who would devour her weakness like vultures. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you search for me? I'm nothing. I have nothing. My family is dead. My title is meaningless. I'm just—" "Mine," he said, and the word rang through the great hall with the force of a declaration. "You're mine, Mira. You've always been mine." The bond between them flared at his words, that golden thread pulling tight until she could barely breathe. Something in her chest responded to his claim, something primitive and elemental that had nothing to do with logic or fear. "I don't understand," she said again, but even as the words left her lips, part of her did understand. The dreams she'd been having for months, the restless ache that had settled in her bones, the way her wolf had grown increasingly agitated, pacing beneath her skin like a caged animal. "The mate bond," Darian said gently, as if he could read her thoughts. "You feel it, don't you? The pulling, the need, the way everything in you recognizes everything in me." Mira's hand flew to her chest, pressing against the spot where the sensation was strongest. "That's impossible. I would have known. I would have felt it before now." "You did feel it," he said, his voice softening with something that might have been tenderness. "But you've spent 3 years suppressing your wolf, haven't you? Hiding her so deep that you could barely access her power. The bond was there, waiting, but you had to be near me for it to fully manifest." The crowd around them seemed to lean forward collectively, hanging on every word of this impossible conversation. A servant girl revealed as lost nobility, the Alpha King claiming her as his mate before the entire kingdom. It was the stuff of legends, of fairy tales whispered in children's nurseries. "This can't be happening," Mira breathed, but even as she said it, she could feel her carefully constructed walls crumbling. The bond sang between them, growing stronger with each passing moment, and her wolf stirred for the first time in years. "Your Majesty," came a tentative voice from somewhere in the crowd. Lord Blackwood, one of the kingdom's most powerful nobles, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private. The ceremony—" Darian turned his head slightly, and the look he gave Lord Blackwood could have melted steel. "The ceremony," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of his supernatural authority, "will continue when I say it continues, not before." Lord Blackwood stumbled backward as if he'd been physically struck, his face pale with terror. No one else in the crowd moved so much as a muscle. "Please," Mira whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "All these people, they don't need to see this, whatever this is." Darian's attention returned to her immediately, his expression gentling. "They need to see exactly this," he said. "They need to see their Alpha King claim his mate. They need to witness the moment their future queen is revealed." "Queen?" The word came out as a strangled gasp. "I can't be queen. I don't know how. I'm not ready. I'm not—" "You're perfect," he said, and the certainty in his voice was like a physical force. "You're exactly what this kingdom needs, what I need." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. The moment his skin touched hers, the bond blazed between them like wildfire, and Mira couldn't stop the small sound that escaped her throat. "I know you're afraid," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "I know you've been hurt, and I know trusting anyone in power feels impossible right now, but I'm not going anywhere, Mira. I've waited 28 years for you. I can wait as long as you need me to wait." The kindness in his voice was almost her undoing. For 3 years she had survived on scraps and shadows, convinced she was worth nothing to anyone. And here was the most powerful man in the kingdom, telling her she was everything. "The people who killed my family," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been. "Are they still out there?" Something deadly flickered across Darian's features. "No," he said simply, "they are not." The finality in his tone told her everything she needed to know. Justice had been served, even if she hadn't been there to witness it. "I don't know how to be what you're asking me to be," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to know," he said. "Not yet. All you have to do is say yes. Say you'll let me court you properly. Say you'll give us a chance to see where this bond leads." The great hall remained frozen around them, but Mira was only dimly aware of their audience now. Her entire world had narrowed to the man standing before her, to the impossible choice he was offering her: freedom or belonging, running or staying, fear or the terrifying possibility of love. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "what happens then?" Darian's smile was radiant. "Then I finish taking my oath, with you standing beside me. Then I introduce you to our people as the woman who will one day be their queen. Then I spend every day proving to you that you're safe here, that you're wanted here." "And if I say no?" His expression didn't change, but she could see the pain that flashed behind his eyes. "Then I let you go, and I rule alone, knowing I found my mate and lost her again. The choice hung between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Mira could feel the bond pulling at her, could sense her wolf finally stirring to full consciousness for the first time in years. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to say yes, to trust this impossible man who claimed to want her above all else. But fear was a powerful thing, and 3 years of hiding had taught her to trust it above all else. "I need time," she said finally. "How much time?" he asked, and there was nothing but infinite patience in his voice. "I don't know." Darian nodded slowly, then stepped back just enough to give her breathing room. When he spoke again, his voice carried clearly through the great hall. "Then time you shall have," he said, "but you'll have it here, where I can protect you, where I can prove to you that everything I've said is true." He turned to address the crowd, though his hand remained extended toward her in clear invitation. "Behold, Lady Mira Ashworth," he said, his voice ringing with authority and pride, "lost daughter of House Ashworth, my fated mate, your future queen." The silence stretched for another heartbeat, and then the great hall erupted in sound as hundreds of voices rose in shock, confusion and wonder. And through it all, Mira stared at the Alpha King's outstretched hand and tried to find the courage to reach for it. Mira stared at the Alpha King's outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity. Around them, the great hall buzzed with whispered conversations and barely contained excitement. Nobles craned their necks to get a better look at the woman their king had just claimed as his mate, their eyes bright with curiosity and calculation. She could feel their stares like physical things, weighing her, measuring her, finding her lacking. A servant girl in a simple grey dress, standing before their magnificent Alpha King in his ceremonial black and gold. The contrast was impossible to ignore. "You have the wrong person," she said again, but the words came out weaker this time, lacking conviction. Darian's expression remained patient, but she caught the flash of something fiercer in his amber eyes. "Tell me," he said softly, "what happened the night your family died?" The question hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. "Tell me," he repeated, his voice gentle but implacable. "What do you remember?" Mira's hands trembled as the memories she had spent 3 years trying to bury came rushing back. "Fire," she whispered. "There was so much fire, and screaming." "You woke to the smell of smoke," Darian said, and it wasn't a question. "Your room was at the top of the east tower, wasn't it? Far enough from the main house that you had time to escape." How could he possibly know that? Mira's eyes widened as she stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You climbed down the old oak tree outside your window," he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. "The same tree you used to sneak out to meet your tutors in the garden when you were supposed to be learning embroidery." A sob caught in Mira's throat. Only her family had known about those stolen lessons, about her secret passion for books and learning that her mother had tried so hard to discourage. "You ran into the forest," Darian said, stepping closer. "Barefoot, in your nightgown, with nothing but the clothes on your back. You lived rough for weeks, foraging, stealing when you had to, and then you made your way here to the capital, where you thought you could disappear completely." The tears she had been fighting finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks as the full reality of what he was telling her sank in. "You know everything," she breathed. "I know that you've spent 3 years believing you're worthless," Darian said, his voice roughening with emotion. "I know that you've convinced yourself that no one would ever look for you, that no one would ever want you, and I know that you're wrong." He reached out again, slower this time, and when she didn't pull away, his fingers brushed the tears from her cheeks with infinite gentleness. "I've been searching for you since the night your family died," he said. "Every lead, every rumour, every possible hiding place. I turned this kingdom upside down looking for you." "But why?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "My family had no political value. We weren't important enough for the Alpha King to— "You are my mate," he said, and the words rang through the great hall with the force of absolute truth. "Do you think political value matters when it comes to the other half of my soul?" The bond flared between them at his declaration, that golden thread pulling so tight that Mira gasped. Her wolf, dormant for so long, stirred restlessly beneath her skin, recognizing something in his words that her human mind was still struggling to accept. "The people who killed my family," she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "You said they were dead. How do you know? How can you be sure?" Darian's expression darkened, and for a moment the civilized facade dropped away entirely, revealing the predator beneath. "Because I killed them myself." The admission sent a ripple of shock through the watching crowd, but Mira felt only a fierce satisfaction. Justice. Finally, after 3 years of nightmares and survivor's guilt, justice. "All of them?" she asked. "All of them Himrotalt," he confirmed. "Lord Garrett Blackmore and his sons, the mercenaries they hired, even the servants who helped them plan the attack. None of them drew breath past the winter solstice 2 years ago." Mira closed her eyes, feeling a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. "Good," she whispered. When she opened her eyes again, Darian was watching her with something that looked like approval. "You're not horrified by the violence?" "They murdered my parents in their beds," she said, her voice steady for the first time since this conversation began. "They burned my home. They tried to kill me too. I'm only sorry I wasn't there to watch them die." "Bloodthirsty little thing," Darian murmured, and there was affection in his voice that made her chest tighten. "You'll make a perfect queen." "I don't know how to be a queen," she protested, but the words lacked their earlier desperation. "You know how to survive," he said. "You know how to be brave when everything in you wants to run. You know how to be kind to those who have less than you, even when you have almost nothing yourself. What else does a queen need?" Before she could answer, a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing a man Mira recognized with a sick twist of dread in her stomach. Lord Aldrich Whitmore, her father's former business partner, the man who had been so eager to comfort her grieving mother in the weeks before the attack. "Your Majesty," Lord Whitmore called out, his voice carrying false joviality. "What a delightful surprise. I had heard rumours that you believed young Lady Ashworth to be alive, but I never imagined—" He let his gaze rake over Mira's simple clothes and uncombed hair. "Are we quite certain this is actually her?" Darian went very still beside her, and Mira could feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried an undercurrent of menace that made the hair on her arm stand on end. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Whitmore?" "Not at all, Your Majesty," Whitmore said quickly, though his eyes remained fixed on Mira. "I'm simply concerned about the possibility of impostors. After all, the real Lady Ashworth was a refined young woman of impeccable breeding. This person looks more like a scullery maid." The insult hit its mark, and Mira flinched as if she'd been struck. She was painfully aware of her appearance, of how she must look to these elegant nobles in their fine clothes and precious jewels. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying beyond Darian's ears. "I don't belong here. I'm not—" "You are everything," Darian said, his voice cutting through her self-doubt like a blade. He turned to face Lord Whitmore, and his expression was nothing short of terrifying. "And you, Lord Whitmore, seem to have forgotten your place." "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect." "Didn't you?" Darian's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the great hall. "Because it sounded very much like you were insulting my mate, and I take a rather dim view of anyone who insults what belongs to me." Lord Whitmore's face went pale, but he pressed on with the desperation of a man who had already gone too far to back down. "I simply think the kingdom deserves better than a servant girl who—" He never got to finish the sentence. Darian moved faster than human eyes could follow, crossing the space between them in the blink of an eye. His hand closed around Whitmore's throat, lifting the older man clean off his feet. "The kingdom," Darian said conversationally, as if he weren't holding a grown man in the air with one hand, "deserves exactly what I give it, and what I'm giving it is Lady Mira Ashworth as its future queen. If you have a problem with that, Lord Whitmore, you're welcome to take it up with me privately. But if you ever speak to her, or about her with anything less than the respect due to your future sovereign, I will tear out your throat with my bare hands. Do we understand each other?" Whitmore made a strangled sound that might have been agreement, and Darian released him. The lord crumpled to the floor, gasping for air and clutching his bruised throat. "Anyone else have concerns about my choice of mate?" Darian asked mildly, scanning the crowd. The silence that greeted his question was absolute. "Excellent." He turned back to Mira, his expression softening immediately. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said, "but I won't tolerate anyone treating you as less than you are." Mira stared up at him, her heart hammering for entirely different reasons now. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever considered her worth defending. "You really mean it," she said wonderingly. "Everything you've said. You really want me." "I've wanted you since before I knew you existed," he said simply, "and I'll want you until the day I die and whatever comes after." The bond sang between them, stronger now than it had ever been, and Mira felt her wolf rise to the surface for the first time in years. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of believing she was worth nothing. Maybe it was time to find out what she was actually worth. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the bond blazed between them like wildfire, and Mira gasped at the intensity of it. It was like coming home and stepping into the sun all at once, like finding the missing piece of herself she hadn't even known was gone. "Yes," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll let you court me. Yes to whatever this is between us." Darian's smile was radiant. "Then let's finish what we started," he said, and turned to address the crowd without releasing her hand. "Behold your future queen," he called out, his voice ringing with pride and authority. "Lady Mira Ashworth, my fated mate and the other half of my soul. Anyone who wishes to show their respect may approach." The nobles began moving forward, some eager to curry favour with their king's chosen mate, others merely curious about this woman who had captured their alpha's heart. But Mira barely noticed them. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the warmth of his hand in hers, and on the impossible future stretching out before them. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid. She was home. The days that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and adjustment. Mira found herself installed in the Queen's chambers, a suite of rooms so opulent that she spent the first morning simply staring at the silk wallpaper and crystal chandeliers, convinced she would wake up back in the servants' quarters at any moment. But Darian made sure she never felt alone in the overwhelming grandeur of palace life. 2 weeks after the ceremony that had changed everything, Mira sat in the private garden behind the royal wing, a book of poetry open in her lap and late afternoon sunlight warming her face. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that Darian had chosen himself, claiming it brought out the storm grey of her eyes. She was beginning to understand that he noticed everything about her. "You look peaceful," came his voice from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching along the garden path. He had shed his formal jacket somewhere, leaving him in dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar. The casual attire made him seem more approachable, though it did nothing to diminish the predatory grace with which he moved. "I am peaceful," she said, surprised to realize it was true. "I never thought I would be again, but I am." Darian settled beside her on the stone bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. The bond hummed contentedly between them, a constant presence now that she had stopped fighting it. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Sonnets," she said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I know it's frivolous, but—" "It's not frivolous," he said firmly. "You're allowed to enjoy beautiful things, Mira. You're allowed to have interests and passions and desires that have nothing to do with survival." The simple statement hit her harder than it should have. For 3 years, every decision had been about staying alive, staying hidden, staying small. The concept of wanting something just because it brought her joy was still foreign. "Tell me about your childhood," Darian said softly. "What did you love when you were young and the world hadn't hurt you yet?" Mira closed the book and leaned back against the bench, letting herself remember. "Books," she said after a moment. "My father's library was enormous, and I spent every free moment in there. My mother despaired of ever making me into a proper lady when I kept choosing poetry over embroidery." "What else?" "Gardens," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I helped design the rose garden at Ashworth Manor. My mother thought it was beneath my station, but I loved working with my hands in the soil. There was something magical about watching things grow." Darian's expression softened. "I'll have the head gardener show you our greenhouses tomorrow. We have specimens from all over the kingdom. I think you'll enjoy them." The casual way he planned their future together, as if there was no question that she would stay, that she would want to see tomorrow and the day after that, made her chest tighten with emotion. "Why are you being so patient with me?" she asked suddenly. "You could command my compliance. You're the Alpha King, and I'm your mate. By shifter law, I belong to you whether I choose it or not." Darian was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes fixed on the roses blooming nearby. "My father commanded my mother's compliance," he said finally. "She was chosen for him, a political alliance that strengthened both their packs. She never had a choice in the matter." "Was she unhappy?" "She was miserable," he said simply. "And so was he, eventually. A bond forced is no bond at all, Mira. It's just ownership. And I don't want to own you. What do you want?" He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I want you to choose me," he said, "not because you have to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't, but because you want to, because when you look at me, you see home." The honesty in his voice was devastating. Mira reached out without thinking, her hand finding his and threading their fingers together. "I'm getting there," she whispered. "Every day I'm getting closer to that choice." "Then I'll wait," he said, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "However long it takes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower in the sky and paint the garden in shades of gold and amber. The peace between them felt precious, something Mira had never expected to find with another person. "There's something I need to tell you," she said eventually. "About the night my family died, something I haven't told anyone." Darian's attention sharpened, but his voice remained gentle. "What is it?" "I saw who led the attack," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I was climbing down the tree when they rode up to the house. Lord Blackmore wasn't the one giving orders." "Who was?" Mira took a shaky breath. "Lord Whitmore, the man who insulted me at the ceremony. He was the one who planned it all. Blackmore was just following his lead." Darian went very still beside her, and she could feel the change in his energy, the way his wolf rose to the surface with predatory interest. "You're certain?" "I'll never forget his voice," she said. "He was giving instructions about where to set the fires, telling them to make sure no one escaped, and he specifically mentioned making sure I was dead. He knew about the oak tree. Darian, he knew I used it to sneak out." "Which means someone told him," Darian said, his voice deadly quiet. "Someone who knew your habits, someone who had access to your family's private routines. A servant, maybe? Or a friend?" "Or a business partner who had been welcomed into your home for years," Darian said, and there was murder in his tone. "Someone your parents trusted enough to share details about their children's lives." Mira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "He's still alive. He was at the ceremony insulting me, and he's still alive while my parents are dead." "Not for long," Darian promised, and there was something in his voice that made her wolf stir restlessly. "I thought I had gotten all of them, but it seems I missed the most important one." "What are you going to do?" "Justice," he said simply. "Long overdue justice." Before Mira could respond, he turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "But first, I want to know something. Are you telling me this because you trust me enough to share the whole truth, or because you want me to handle it for you?" The question caught her off guard, and she considered it carefully. "Both," she said finally. "I trust you, and I want Lord Whitmore to pay for what he did. But mostly I'm tired of carrying this secret alone. I'm tired of being the only one who knows the whole truth about that night." "Then you won't carry it alone any more," he said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "And Whitmore will answer for his crimes. I promise you that." The bond flared between them at his promise, and Mira felt something settle in her chest. Safety, security, the knowledge that she was no longer facing the world by herself. "I have something for you," Darian said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet box. "It belonged to your mother. I retrieved it from the ruins of your family's estate." Mira's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a rose. She remembered her mother wearing it every day, remembered how it caught the light when she leaned over to kiss Mira goodnight. "I thought you should have it back," Darian said softly, "a piece of who you were before everything changed." Tears blurred Mira's vision as she reached for the necklace with trembling fingers. "How did you find it?" "I searched through everything," he said, "every piece of rubble, every scrap of fabric. I was looking for anything that might help me find you, and I found this in what used to be your mother's dressing room. The chain was broken, but I had it repaired." Mira held the necklace up to the fading light, watching the pendant spin slowly. "She told me it was a symbol of hope," she whispered, "that roses always bloom again even after the hardest winter." "Will you let me put it on you?" Darian asked. Mira nodded, too emotional to speak. She turned on the bench, lifting her hair away from her neck, and felt his fingers brush against her skin as he fastened the clasp. The familiar weight of the pendant settled against her throat, and for the first time since that terrible night, she felt truly connected to the family she had lost. "Thank you," she whispered, turning back to face him. "For everything. For finding this. For protecting me. For being patient while I figure out how to trust again." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You're my mate, Mira. Taking care of you isn't a burden or a favour. It's a privilege." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. Without overthinking it, Mira leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a soft, hesitant kiss. The moment their mouths touched, the bond blazed between them like wildfire. Darian's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, and Mira felt her wolf sing with pure joy. This was right. This was home. This was the future she had been too afraid to hope for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Darian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon to say it, and I know you're not ready to hear it, but I needed you to know. I love your strength and your courage and the way you've survived everything that tried to destroy you. I love you, Mira Ashworth, and nothing will ever change that." Mira's heart clenched at the declaration, at the raw honesty in his voice. She wasn't ready to say the words back yet, but she was getting closer. Every day with him brought her closer to that moment. "Ask me again in a few weeks," she said softly. "When Lord Whitmore is dead and my family's ghosts are finally at rest. Ask me then, and I think you'll get a different answer." Darian smiled, and it was radiant. "Then I'll wait," he said, "and I'll ask you every day until you're ready to answer." As the stars began to appear overhead, they sat together in the garden where Mira was learning to bloom again, her mother's necklace warm against her throat and her hand safe in his. She was beginning to understand what it meant to choose love over fear, and for the first time in 3 years, the future looked bright. 3 months later, Mira stood before the floor-length mirror in the Queen's chambers, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate pearls, flowing from her shoulders like liquid starlight. Her dark hair had been woven with tiny white roses, a nod to her mother's pendant, which gleamed silver against her throat, but it wasn't the fine clothes or elegant styling that made her look different. It was the confidence in her eyes, the way she stood tall instead of trying to make herself small, the absence of fear in her expression. "You look like a queen," said Elena, her lady-in-waiting, as she made final adjustments to the pearl-encrusted bodice. Mira smiled, remembering the frightened servant girl who had tried to escape through a crowd 3 months ago. "I feel like one," she admitted, surprised by the truth of it. Today was their mating ceremony, the official union that would make her queen of the Northern Territories and bind her to Darien for life. Unlike the coronation that had been interrupted by fate, this ceremony would go exactly as planned. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the seamstresses with last-minute alterations. Instead, Darien stepped into the room, resplendent in black velvet and gold thread, his amber eyes warm with love and pride. The sight of him still made her breath catch, though for entirely different reasons now. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," Mira protested, though she made no move to hide from his gaze. "I'm the Alpha King," he said, with a grin that was both predatory and affectionate. "I make the rules." Elena curtsied and slipped from the room, leaving them alone. Darien approached slowly, as if Mira were some precious thing that might disappear if he moved too quickly. "You're beautiful," he said simply, "but then you always are." "Flatterer," she said, but warmth bloomed in her chest at the words. 3 months of his patient courtship had taught her to accept his compliments without deflection, to believe that she truly was precious to him. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "A wedding gift." Mira's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. The band was white gold, delicate and feminine, but the stone was extraordinary, a large sapphire the exact colour of storm clouds, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. "It matches your eyes," Darien said softly. "I had it made specifically for you. There's nothing like it in the world." "It's beautiful," Mira whispered, holding out her hand so he could slide it onto her finger beside the simple engagement band he had given her weeks ago. "But you've already given me so much." "I've given you what you deserve," he said, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. "What you've always deserved. A home, protection, love, respect. Things that should have been yours by right, not gifts I had to earn the privilege of offering." The words still had the power to undo her, even after months of hearing variations of them. Darien never let her forget her worth, never let her sink back into the belief that she was nothing special. "Is it finished?" she asked quietly. "With Lord Whitmore." Darien's expression darkened briefly. "It's finished," he confirmed. "He confessed to everything before he died. Your parents have been avenged, and his co-conspirators have been dealt with. You're safe, Mira, completely safe." She nodded, feeling the last weight lift from her shoulders. The justice she had craved for 3 years was finally complete, and she could move forward without looking over her shoulder for ghosts from her past. "Are you ready?" Darien asked, offering her his arm. "To become my queen officially? To let the whole kingdom witness our bond?" Mira considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, the thought of standing before hundreds of nobles would have terrified her. Now, the idea of publicly claiming Darien as hers filled her with anticipation rather than fear. "I'm ready," she said, slipping her hand through his arm. "But first, there's something I need to tell you." Darien's eyebrows rose in question. "I love you," Mira said simply, watching his face transform with joy. I love your patience and your strength and the way you make me feel like I can be anything. I love that you waited for me to choose you, and I love that you never doubted I would. I love you, Darian Blackthorn, and I choose you, today and every day for the rest of our lives." For a moment, the Alpha King looked utterly speechless. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she had come to expect from him. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips, "my queen, my mate, my everything." The bond sang between them, complete and unbreakable, now that they had both chosen it freely. Mira felt her wolf stretch contentedly, finally at peace after years of hiding and fear. "Now I'm ready," she said with a smile that was radiant with happiness. The ceremony was perfect in every way the coronation had not been. Mira walked down the aisle with confidence, her hand steady in Darian's as they spoke their vows before the assembled kingdom. When the priest declared them mated and bound, the great hall erupted in cheers and celebration. But Mira barely heard the noise. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the impossible journey that had brought them together, on the future stretching out before them bright with possibility. Later, as they danced at their wedding feast, Mira caught sight of a young servant girl watching from the edges of the crowd. The girl's dress was simple, her hair hidden beneath a cap, and she looked just as lost and invisible as Mira had once felt. "I want to help her," Mira said quietly to Darian, nodding toward the girl, "and others like her, girls who think they're nobody, who believe they don't matter." "Then we will," Darian said without hesitation. "We'll create a program, a way to identify and support young women who need guidance and opportunity. Your first royal initiative as queen." Mira's heart swelled with love and purpose. This was what she wanted her reign to be about, lifting up those who had been forgotten, proving that everyone had value regardless of their birth or circumstances. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when I thought I was worthless, for making me believe that I deserved to be loved." Darian spun her gracefully around the dance floor, his amber eyes warm with devotion. "You never have to thank me for loving you, Mira. It's not something I do for you. It's something I do because you're you, because you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's the way it was always meant to be." As the night wore on and the celebration continued around them, Mira marvelled at how completely her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a servant girl trying to disappear into a crowd. Now she was a queen, beloved and cherished, with a man who would move mountains to keep her safe. She had learned that sometimes the thing you run from is exactly the thing you need, that love could find you even when you tried to hide from it, that worth wasn't something you had to earn, it was something you possessed simply by being alive. And as she looked into her husband's eyes, feeling the golden thread of their bond humming with contentment between them, she knew that her story was just beginning. The servant girl who had once believed she was nothing had found her place as queen. But more importantly, she had found her home in the arms of a man who saw her as everything. Where are you listening from? I'd love to meet you in the comments and hear what you thought of Mira and Darian's story. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering fear, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these stories of hope and healing. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next one.